okay, so what are the emerging threats that maybe arms control initiatives could help reduce? Well, the first one that's mentioned repeatedly in these three documents is the missile threats. And you'll notice there are a lot of missiles you could be worried about if you want to worry about missiles, just in 4 countries that are mentioned the most in these documents. Never mind some of the ones that aren't mentioned. We could have, well, Iran, China, Russia, North Korea. Now, all this does is impress you that there are a lot of things that could go, long distances and deliver things. We won't get into the types and all of that, at least off these charts. However, I think it's worth noting that one way to think about these and what they mean and the range arcs, which you'll notice the range arcs. If you put those range arcs and overlap them with our range arcs and the range arcs of the British and French, you end up with a concentration of overlap in these areas. Now, I don't know anything other than one conclusion from this. That's not good news. You want the overlap to be in the middle of the ocean, I think. Yeah? Not in the Middle East, not in East Asia, and not in Europe. And the reason why, to say nothing of Pakistan and India, is because those are the places where people are not getting along with one another, right? So this is not great. The overlap is where these things are being aimed, possibly, is bad news. Now, if it was just that, that would be enough in my book. But things are getting worse, arguably. This is something called a maneuvering reentry vehicle. Now, I know something about this, and we should know something about this, because, as we'll soon find out, this technology literally is American technology, and it was stolen and distributed to a lot of places, like South Korea, China, North Korea, India, and Iran. From a missile we deployed to convince the Russians to come to the negotiating table. It was called the Pershing II. If you go to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, they've got one. It was the most advanced missile in the world in the 80s. Does anybody know where of Green River here in Utah? That's where they made it. They developed it there. You go there, there's no base. It's almost a ghost town. But that technology, 30 years later, has finally spread. Now, why does this matter? Well, what is a MAR? It's a warhead that separates from the missile, and instead of following a ballistic trajectory that's predictable, so that air defenses can go, well, if it's in this part of the trajectory, we know it'll keep going that way, and therefore we can calculate where to hit it. It does something very annoying. You'll notice there are fins. See, I don't think I have my pointer here. Or do I? Did someone give it to me? I think you did. Hang on here. This is also embarrassing. Well, look, I'm road mobile. Do you see at the top, at the second stage, there are little fins? At the top, there are fins on the side. Those are control valves, if you will. They control the flight. So when it separates, instead of going in a predictable path, it will move around. And in fact, it tops up and slows down so that it can actually look at where it wants to terminally go. The accuracy of these things is very great compared to the counterparts that go on a ballistic trajectory. And missile defenses have a heck of a time dealing with these things. They don't generally work at all. So this is a big problem. These things are being developed and deployed. In the case of China, I think we can almost say they're deployed. Not much more time, they will be. More distant but coming is something called a hypersonic boost glide vehicle. These things operate much like the MAR, but at much higher speeds. The speeds are so high, they will punch through almost any air defense that we know of or is being planned. And these things may take another decade or so. They essentially are derived from an old Nazi idea. By the way, almost all weapons concepts have Nazi origins, I'm thinking. They spent a lot of time thinking about weapons. And we've used a lot of those concepts. Essentially, this hypersonic boost glide vehicle is delivered first by a large rocket and then is released before it glides through the atmosphere. And it is not powered, but it goes at many times the speed of sound. And so it's very hard to catch up to it, and it also moves in a non-ballistic trajectory. It has terminal guidance and is very quick. There are powered versions that are being developed. These are mostly Russian, and we see here, but there is a Chinese variant over there. This is an Indian cooperative agreement with a Russian program here. The Taiwanese, I don't really think they have a hypersonic unit, but they would like you to believe they do, which tells you that this is the thing for everyone to get into. All right, now, these are, perhaps going to take a while to develop, and I'll tell you why. When you move through the atmosphere at high speeds, the air compresses against whatever you're flying, and it makes for a big thermal buildup. And it's very hard for sensors like things that want to see visually what's going on to figure out terminally where they should go. They can't see through that. They have to slow down, or they have to have some ability to see through that, what's called plasma buildup. And so the materials also have to sustain all sorts of heat. It's very difficult. And there's vibration. There's all sorts of issues. They're working through this, though. And the guidance and stability of the unit is also something that will require lots of computational skills. Now, I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. The second thing is related to missiles insofar as they're delivered by missiles. How many of you have heard of anti-satellite weapons? Does that ring any bells at all? Well, you only have two hands. We have satellites that, let's see. What do we have here? Oh, smartphone. Smartphone. Well, maybe not a smart owner, but a smartphone. What do we have on here? Global positioning. Well, what's that based on? A global positioning satellite in geosynchronous orbit. We're getting signals from American satellites up there. Those satellites give guidance not only so that I can get here by car, but so that the military can send missiles and troops and anything else precisely anywhere on the globe. The Chinese have them, the Russians have them, we have them, the West has them. What else do we use the phone for? Well, telephone. Well, what's that generally used for? I mean, we have microwave stations on the ground, but we also, for certain long-distance calls, have communication satellite. Well, once again, the military depends very heavily on that as well. We also have images. The Google Maps basically are satellite photographs. And where are the, oh, they're up there again. The military depends on that. There used to be something called the Defense Mapping Agency. They don't have that anymore because they depend now on the satellites to give them all the maps. But it used to be a really big deal. I mean, just knowing where you were going in the Second World War was a big problem. I think most of our airplanes, for example, when we were trying to bomb Japan, were lost because, well, they got lost and they ran out of fuel and went into the ocean because they didn't have a map. You know? So all those satellites are critical also for something else. We're building up our ability to have nuclear weapons delivered. But what if those nuclear weapon systems are made deaf, dumb, and blind because someone knocks out our satellites? Oh my, that will be a problem. We'll have a headless Hulk. So, you'll see in every one of these documents references to this problem. Now, at the very tip of this problem is what the Russians and Chinese are doing. And it is something that does not get discussed very much in the public, but it's available if you look for the right articles. It's something called satellite stalkers, and that's just a very fancy way of saying if the Russians or Chinese want to threaten our ability to defend, let's say, Taiwan, or to do the defense of Japan against North Korea, or any number of other scenarios you can think of, what they could do is, instead of announcing that they're going to attack us by firing a rocket, which takes some time to get to the satellite, simply have lots of satellites near our satellites that could reach out with an arm and move our satellite so it won't function, because it has to be in a specific place to function, or bump it so that it's damaged and doesn't work, or, as you can see here, explode it. They're doing this. There are launches that have been identified. There's been one in the case of the Chinese where they talk about explicitly putting maneuvering satellites in space. The Russians, similarly, have been doing this. It's not clear how you defend against that. And we'll get to that in a moment. But this is a big, big current problem. This is not a distant problem anymore.